Hi there, Beech class. This learning video is designed to help you make discoveries about the climate of Vietnam. Now, by climate, I really just talking about the weather. What's the weather like in Vietnam? Now, before you complete this learning video, I want you to first make sure you've already had a look at these pictures. Take some time looking at them, exploring each one individually, and see if you can come up with some of your own discoveries and initial thoughts about what you think the climate in Vietnam might be like. In order to help you, perhaps some of these words or phrases might be useful. We'll certainly come back to them later. Once you've done that, then we can crack on with this learning video. Now, the tools that we're going to use in order to look at the climate of Vietnam are going to be some maps and some special types of maps, and also some data. Let me show you what I mean. The first map we're going to look at is a really simple one. It's a map of the world. Okay? It shows where all the major continents are: North America, South America, Europe. Okay, here's us in Great Britain over here. Africa, Australasia, and Asia. Now, what we need to do is we need to just identify where Vietnam is on the map. So Vietnam is on this southern eastern tip of Asia. So it's in Southeast Asia. It's on this peninsula here. And it's a very long, thin country which starts here and goes up all the way along this coast. And the reason that that's important is because its position on the globe can have a very, very important effect on its climate. Right? What we've got here, this red line, is what we call the equator. The equator is an imaginary line that goes right around the center, right around the middle of the Earth. Now, it's important to note that Vietnam, especially its southernmost tip, is very, very, very close to the equator, especially when you compare it to Great Britain, which is quite a long distance away from the equator. That's going to have a serious impact on the different climates of Britain and Vietnam. Let me show you what I mean. This is a very special type of map, and it's a map which shows the different temperatures in different parts of the globe. Now, as you can see, the areas surrounding the equator are coloured in red. This is to indicate that these are very, very hot parts of the globe. Okay? As you move away from the equator, the colour goes to orange, to yellow, to greens, to light blues, into dark blues. This shows the transition from very hot places into still very hot places, into cooler places, into quite cold places, into very, very cold places. In fact, the further you move away north and the further you move away south from the equator, the cooler and cooler and cooler and cooler the temperature becomes. Now, this is important because we've already identified that Vietnam, here in the southern eastern tip of Asia, is quite close to the equator. So the first discovery that we've made is that Vietnam is hot. And hopefully that matched up with some of the pictures that you've already explored, okay, of this Vietnamese weather forecast. It's quite common for Vietnamese weather to regularly have temperatures well above 30 degrees Celsius, okay, even above 40 degrees Celsius and higher. Okay? That's much hotter than it would even get in the very, very height of summer in Britain. Okay? And this temperature, this hot temperature, remains pretty constant throughout the whole year. There are times where it is slightly hotter, and there are times where it's slightly cooler, but in general, that hot weather stays in Vietnam across the whole year. I lived in Vietnam for 3 years, and every single day I lived in Ho Chi Minh City, it was hot, believe me. This means that it's popular for resorts like this, particularly on the southern islands of Vietnam, places like Phu Quoc, because it's very, very sunny and hot. Okay? It also means it's a nice place for plants to go, because plants need hot weather to grow. The next map we're going to look at is this one here. Now, this map is another special map, and it uses colour again, but in a slightly different way. This map uses colour to show how much rain falls in each place. And if you look at this scale along the side, you've got these grey into brown and yellow colours show places where, well, up here there's almost no rain at all, down into only quite a small amount of rain. As the colours change into light green, it shows there's a fair amount of rain. Into dark green, and these almost blue colours show that's a lot of rain to fall. And if you get into purples or this blue colour, that's an incredibly huge amount of rain to fall. Okay, like in the middle of a rainforest, basically. Now, I've just quickly circled us here in Great Britain. Over here in Great Britain, we've got these kind of light, moving to slightly dark green colours. This shows actually in Britain, quite a fair amount of rain does fall. Okay, and throughout the year, we have rainfall in Britain. Not at the moment, because our weather's being particularly fine, but across the year, we have a fair amount of rain. Down here in Vietnam, you can see it's moved into those darker green colours down here. This shows there is a lot more rain in Vietnam. Okay? Vietnam would be categorised, particularly the southern part of Vietnam, as a tropical climate, okay? Where it's very, very hot, but also importantly, very, very wet. Vietnam is a wet country. Okay? As a result, lots of the surface of the ground is covered in waterways, rivers, and lakes and streams. Okay? It's another reason why plants grow so well in Vietnam. It's hot and it's wet, perfect for growing plants. It's also another reason why the towns and cities often suffer from very, very serious flooding. This is a very common sight in Vietnam. People wouldn't think twice about this, about walking to work in with the streets completely flooded. So we've made two main discoveries about the climate in Vietnam. In general, the climate in Vietnam is very, very hot. This is because of its proximity, how close it is to the equator. Also, it is very, very wet. Okay, that's why we would describe it as a tropical climate. But this doesn't tell the whole story. Okay? People who have examined those pictures closely might be saying, hang on, Mr. McKinnon, wait a minute. Some of those pictures show that Vietnam as not a wet place at all. It showed us as a very, very dry place. This picture, you can see here, the earth is cracking because there's just no water in it. It looks very, very dry. Now, this is because of the rainfall in Vietnam. It doesn't fall evenly across the whole year. In fact, it can be categorized into two main periods. Let me get a highlighted pen out here. Okay. You've got this period here, the period between May and September. In this period, it rains lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots. It is a very rainy time. It rains every day, and it rains a huge amount. This is what the Vietnamese people would call their wet season. However, it doesn't stay like this for the whole year. At other parts of the year, in this block from October through to December and into the new year, into January, February, March, and even into April, you've got times where actually the rainfall is very, very low. You'll have days and days and days and weeks and weeks and weeks, and even months and months will go past and not a single drop of rain will fall. So actually, to say that Vietnam is a wet place doesn't tell quite the whole picture. At certain times of the year, it is extremely wet. Torrential rain falls on a daily basis. But at other times of year, it's very, very dry. Okay? So in Britain, we consider ourselves to have 4 seasons: spring, summer, autumn, and winter. And each season has quite distinct weather. It's the weather that changes, that determines when the seasons change. Okay? In Vietnam, they wouldn't consider themselves to have 4 seasons. They consider themselves to have 2 main seasons. A wet season, where it rains lots and lots and lots, and a dry season, where it rains hardly at all. And that's why at certain times of the year, you will see images like this around Vietnam. Times where it hasn't rained for months and months and months, and everything has gone very, very dry. The next thing we said was that Vietnam was hot. But hang on a minute, this doesn't tell the whole story. Because some of you will have looked very carefully at the pictures from that first activity, and you'll have seen images like this. People wrapped up very snugly in their coats and their hats and their gloves on their motorbikes. You might have even spotted this picture of snow falling. If Vietnam is such a hot place, well, how on earth can these pictures be from Vietnam? Well, it's because for two main reasons. The number one reason lies in just how long Vietnam is a country. Vietnam is a very, very long country, and in general it travels from south to north and north to south. Okay? There's roughly 1,000-mile difference between the south and the north of Vietnam. And that's important, because as we discussed earlier, if I go back all the way back here, as you travel away from the equator, the temperature gets cooler. So in Vietnam, as you travel north of the country, the temperature gets cooler and cooler and cooler and cooler. So if you come up here to Hanoi, the capital city, actually at certain times of the year, it can be quite chilly. Okay? There's other times where it will be hot, but there are times where it will be quite chilly. As well as that, there's another thing we have to consider, and that's the topography of the country, basically how mountainous or flat it is. Now there's parts of Vietnam which are very, very flat. Okay? Down here in the Mekong Delta Basin, okay, around here, around Hanoi as well, okay, we've got some flat areas. But then we've also got some very mountainous areas. We've got this mountainous north area up here, and we've got this central mountainous area here. The reason that's important for climate is because in general, as a rule, the further you travel upwards, up into the mountains, the colder it gets. So if you travel very, very high up into mountains, it gets colder and colder and colder. That means in these central mountains, if you travel up high, it can get quite chilly. If you combine that with traveling north away from the equator, if you have mountains right in the north of Vietnam, like up here in Sapa, actually it can get very, very cold indeed. Now this picture is quite rare. Okay, when this picture was taken, this was the first time it had snowed in Sapa for I think about 100 years. But it does sometimes get so cold that it can even snow in Vietnam, but it's very, very rare. But it does often get quite cold and quite chilly. So it is true to say that Vietnam is a hot country, but it doesn't tell the whole story. Okay? It's not all as hot as it's not all the same. As a general rule, the further you travel north, the cooler it gets, and as a general rule, the further you travel up into the mountains, the cooler it gets as well. Okay. Your challenge: use the information you've gained from looking at these maps and these data and this little learning video to talk about the climate in Vietnam, and you can use these words to help share your ideas. And then your final challenge is, now you know what the climate is like in Vietnam, see if you can use some of the maps and the data, or find your own maps and your own data to compare what the climate is like in Vietnam and compare it to how it is in Tunbridge Wells. Good luck, guys.